Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, Illinois has a moratorium on evictions through July, but activists want more time.
Teaching LGBTQ history in Illinois schools, plus a look at other laws going into effect today.
The push by some to get police out of public schools. That and more in Spotlight Politics.
Artwork small enough to fit on a postage stamp.
And how you can visit the outdoor gardens at the Garfield Park Conservatory. But first, it has already been a violent year as the city heads into what is historically a very violent weekend, the 4th of July. Brandis has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Brandis.
In Paris, as new numbers from the Chicago Police Department show that the city is on pace to revisit a historic spike in violent crime, the department is doubling down on its all-hands-on-deck policing strategy. In June alone, the city saw 89 murders and 424 shootings. That means for the first half of the year, murders are up 34% and shootings are up 45% compared to the first half of last year. But CPD says citywide overall crime is down 9%, which includes sexual assault, robbery, burglary, and car theft. Data shows, though, that the 329 murders the city has had so far this year matches that of the first half of 2016, when the year ended with 762 homicides. That's the highest number of murders seen in Chicago in almost 20 years. There's more of this story on our website. Plus, our Spotlight Politics team breaks down CPD's anti-violence strategy later in the broadcast. Drivers have had a break from tickets during the pandemic these last few months, but starting today, vehicle ticketing will resume for certain violations. Starting today, pay attention to street sweeping restrictions. Those are back in effect. The city will resume booting vehicles on Monday, July 6th. On July 16th, you can be ticketed for an expired city sticker or residential parking permit. The Illinois Secretary of State's office has extended the moratorium, though, for expired vehicle restrictions until October 2nd. And another symbol that some city services are returning to normal, the city rededicated a newly renovated library branch today.
We're seeing our shutdown, and we're seeing this situation as really being a glass half full. We can have programs in person, and then we can also extend the library outside the walls of the library into your own home.
Library Commissioner Andrea Telly explaining that while the library branches are open under the city's 4th phase, there are restrictions and limits. Thus, CPL has emphasized its digital or virtual offerings as well. Telly joined Mayor Lori Lightfoot and her wife, Amy Eshelman, who worked for the Chicago Public Library for 18 years, in touring the 15,000 square foot Merlot Library branch in Lakeview. All of the library branches, though, will be closed Friday through the holiday weekend. And now, Paris, back to you.
Brandis, today's the first of the month traditionally when rent is due, but the pandemic and economic shutdown have made paying rent tough for many Illinoisans, which is why Governor Pritzker extended a moratorium on evictions until the end of this month. Housing equity activists say it should extend beyond that, but landlords say their livelihoods are in jeopardy with the stream of income generated from rent running out. Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia says he's pushing for a nationwide extended moratorium bill in Congress due to the potential for the virus to spread among states.
People are becoming more desperate. There is a concern that as we see a great surge in new COVID cases in southern states, that we could be headed for a worsening economy, and that will make it more difficult for states that are doing better, like Illinois, from coming back to work and a sense of normalcy.
And joining us now with more are Ivy Abed, a steering committee member of the Lift the Ban Coalition. She's also a Chicago high school teacher. And Paul Arena, Director of Legislative Affairs at the Illinois Rental Property Owners Association. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight. I want to get right to it. Ivy, tell us what the Lift the Ban Coalition is advocating for right now.
Absolutely. So our primary purpose as a coalition is to lift the ban on rent control. A preemption has existed on rent control in Illinois since the 90s, and that has prevented us from making any meaningful regulation of rent. One of the reasons this is particularly important during the coronavirus pandemic is because our elected lawmakers have continuously pointed to this ban as a reason for why we cannot offer any kind of meaningful economic rent relief to the tenants that we are working with. In addition, it is incredibly important to us that we make sure that the eviction moratorium is extended throughout the duration and beyond the crisis for at least 3 months, because we are already seeing that tenants are displacing themselves. I talked to a mother on Sunday who actually, she was supposed to be covered by the Federal CARES Act, but she was not aware. And she did not know whether or not the eviction moratorium was going to be extended. And because of that uncertainty, she actually chose to displace herself. And now her and her children are all doubled up with a family friend. So we're already seeing displacement and homelessness occurring as a result of the instability of not having a universal eviction moratorium.
And Paul Arena, your organization represents people who own and manage residential properties. What are you hearing from your members?
For the most part, so our membership are more the mom and pop type landlords, small, middle class people that might own just a couple properties. So it's a small business. And for the most part, our members are experiencing satisfactory collections right now. We're not experiencing an extreme level of delinquency. Those who have had cases where a tenant is struggling because of job displacement due to the virus, they're working with them. I think our problem with the moratorium is more related to the non-COVID situations, things where people are working at a job that wasn't affected, or issues that are not rent related, other circumstances.
Ivy, are you seeing that happen a lot, where folks are not paying rent but using COVID as an excuse?
I have not spoken to that many people, and I think the unemployment rate right now really speaks to itself. I saw that there was a report released today that showed that something like 50% of Americans are not currently working right now. And so, like, the idea that this is kind of a boogeyman, that there's this renter out there who is choosing not to pay rent, when in fact that the entire state system is set up to punish people who do not pay rent, and the balance of power is heavily balanced against tenants. So if you have an eviction filing, that can make it almost impossible for you to find a new apartment. And the idea that there would be folks who are taking on that risk for no reason is not reasonable to me. Most of the people that I am talking to as I'm doing outreach to tenants are people who have lost their jobs or have had their hours cut, who are now unable to pay rent. So another woman that I want to talk about is Teresa. She's a mother and she's a security guard. Her hours were reduced by 80% because she's a security guard. Her landlord sent all his tenants a letter telling them that Amazon is hiring. And when the stimulus check came out, the landlord told them that they needed to prioritize paying rent over any other expense, including groceries. Teresa has fallen behind on her rent, and she's already received a 5-day notice. And while we like to say that most landlords are mom and pops, the landlord that is serving Teresa had an eviction notice. That landlord has actually bought up 1,500 units on the south side.
So, Paul,
so while there are mom and pop landlords, and that is by numbers a larger percentage of landlords, most tenants are experiencing landlords who have buildings with multiple units, many units, large buildings, and those are the people who are demanding that their income stream be maintained.
And Paul, you're saying that most of your members are having income come in from rent. Does that mean that they can perhaps take care of some of these other renters that are struggling?
Well, I think, we have a higher unemployment rate, but people are receiving unemployment benefits, and that's covering that gap. So those people are paying us. And I think what's important to keep in mind is that we're talking about policy that would affect the whole state. So we have to take a comprehensive look at what's going on in the whole circumstance. It has to work for everyone. That's why it's our preference that we have access to the courts where judges can sort it out. Ivy brought up some great points, and in circumstances where a judge might take all those factors into consideration before displacing a tenant. As far as us absorbing the people who are being displaced, I can't speak for the Chicago market. In our market right here, the vacancy rates are low right now. There's, apartments are renting quickly when they become available. So I don't know that there's capacity in the system statewide, but I'm sure, that varies by region.
And Ivy, you heard Congressman Garcia earlier. This is disproportionately hitting Black and brown communities. Should they have kind of a special consideration here when facing eviction?
I mean, I think that we know that eviction court has the same problems with systemic racism that most of our justice system suffers, and that if we have universal protections for renters, we will protect by nature the people who are most affected by the eviction process, which is primarily women of color.
I want to thank you both for sharing your views. And up next, a minimum wage hike and new driving offenses are just some of the laws going into effect today. Amanda Vinicky will have that breakdown, but first a look at the weather.
Minimum wage workers are about to see bigger paychecks. That's just one of many new laws that take effect today. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the highlights. Amanda.
Brandis, new laws take effect at various points throughout the year, but every July 1st, we see a bushel of them, and there's a reason for that. That's because July 1st is the start of Illinois' new fiscal year. So for starters, happy FY21, Brandis and viewers. Now, unlike in the recent past, Illinois does in fact have a budget to begin the fiscal year, albeit it is one that's dependent on borrowing and that is precariously balanced given the government revenues taking such a hit during the coronavirus pandemic. And that brings us to the first law that I'm going to focus on, the increase in the minimum wage. This is a major victory for lower income earners, not so much for retailers.
It's a real kick in the teeth, frankly, to every retailer in the state of Illinois.
Retail Merchants Association, Rob Carr, notes that it is the second hike in the state minimum wage that Illinois employers have had to factor into their expenses this year. Illinois' minimum wage rose by $1 from $8.25 to $9.25 in January. Now it's set to go up by $1 every year until it reaches $15 in the year 2025. Those who work in the city of Chicago will reach that mark faster. Illinois' new minimum wage may be $10 an hour, but in the city, it's now $14, up from $13, and in the rest of Cook County, so in the suburbs, $13, up from $12. There are some exceptions for smaller businesses, for those who work on tips, like restaurant servers. Employers will certainly appreciate, employees that is, will certainly appreciate those boosts to their paychecks, but retailers say it was always going to be tough, and especially so in the midst of a pandemic.
We're dealing with record unemployment. We're dealing with retailers who are, frankly, hanging on. If you are a retailer, like an apparel shop, for example, occupation, 50% occupancy is not viable over the long term. We're talking a lifeline to hopefully get us to the next phase. It's buying time. How anyone expects us to really get back on our feet, rehire, do any of those things that they would like to see us do when we're imposing these kind of artificial costs is a real question.
Moving on to another new law. This one puts drivers on notice. It is already illegal to text or to use a different electronic device while you're behind the wheel. It's been that way for about a decade. More recently, Illinois made it a moving violation, as in it's going to stay on your record if you get cited for texting while driving. This law kicks it up a notch. If you're texting and cause harm to someone else, at minimum, you'll get a $1,000 fine and a year-long suspension of your driver's license.
Secretary White always says that if you're driving a car, focus on the task at hand. Driving. If you have to send a text message or read a text message, it can wait. Don't put someone's life in jeopardy. Don't put your own in jeopardy.
Drivers will also lose their license for a year if they cause injury to someone in a school zone or in a crosswalk that is. On the opposite end of these tougher penalties is a law that will allow drivers to keep their licenses. Before today, if you racked up parking fees under Illinois law, you could have your driver's license suspended. Not anymore. Now, the state's comptroller did begin to rein in this practice by not dealing with municipalities' reports of big parking fines, but this puts it in statute. Advocates for the change say that as a result, some 75,000 Illinois residents will have their driver's license suspensions cleared from their record.
Sort of creates a catch-22. Many jobs require a driver's license, even if they're not driving jobs. And so inability to pay tickets can lead to loss of license, which makes it hard to gain access to good paying employment, which then in turn makes it hard to pay tickets. And so the cycle kind of continues and people can end up in sort of a debt spiral and really face serious barriers to employment as a result.
If all of this talk of new laws has you feeling civic-minded, well, here's a law for you. As WTTW has reported, the plan is for Illinois students to head back to their classrooms this fall. No more coronavirus-inspired remote learning. Middle school students will have a new lesson plan. A law sponsored by State Senator Jackie Collins requires 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to be taught civics.
We need to hear the voices of the next generation. So civic education is really about enlightenment, empowerment, and engagement. And we see that now, I think, with the Black Lives Matter movement. I believe that our children should be exposed to the role that they play, that they have agency, and they really can be the change that they want to see.
Now, critics with this law were concerned about adding another mandate on educators and on schools at a time when, as ever, really, money is tight. But Collins says with what's happening today, with the protests and the civil actions, it shows the importance of teaching civics. Now, this won't be the only curricula new for the next school year. The final law that I'll mention requires that public schools teach LGBTQ history. And more on that in just a moment. Brandes, back to you.
That's right, Amanda. We've got a little more on that coming up later on. Thank you. How Chicago area hotels are managing under phase 4 of reopening.
Look, let's be clear. Schools are not correctional facilities.
Our Spotlight Politics team on some city council members' push to get police out of public schools.
I've been questioned by the postal authorities.
Why a Chicago artist's work has him at odds with the United Postal Service. And things are in full Pritzker in 2019. Joining us with more are Victor Salvo, founder and executive director of the Legacy Project, which supports efforts to share LGBTQ history. Illinois State Senator Heather Staines, a Democrat from Chicago and sponsor of the bill. And Jennifer Breyer, director of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Welcome and welcome back to all of you to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you.
So, Senator Staines, let's start with you, please. You were the Senate sponsor of this law. What exactly does it require from public school districts?
Well, it gives a lot of flexibility in how they do it, but requires every district to teach accurate history, including the history about LGBTQ individuals. There's a lot of flexibility in how they develop in the curriculum, at what ages that they want to do that, but that has to get covered, which really does help promote accurate history and also really helps LGBTQ individuals feel more included and sort of promoting a strong sense of equity in the schools.
And it has to be covered by the end of 8th grade.
That's correct.
Victor, why is this law important?
Because LGBTQ youth go through their entire lives without ever learning anything positive about people like themselves. At the exact same time, they're being exposed to epithets being hurled at them in the halls of their schools. And it prevents them from really being able to develop the kind of self that they deserve to be. They develop instead self-esteem issues. They're bullied. Some of them are driven to suicide. It's an unconscionable thing to put a child through at such a difficult time in their life. So this is really going to save lives. I'm convinced of it.
Professor Breyer, you did some work around California's law, which was passed in 2011. What was the impact of that law in California?
Well, a group of historians who teach at different institutions in California, mostly public institutions, like where I teach at UIC, made a real commitment to integrating and helping teachers figure out how to integrate LGBT curriculum into various grade levels. So they did an amazing amount of work in terms of designing lesson plans for different grades at different sort of developmental stages, and really thought about how to teach this history in ways that would make sense to children at their ages. So not to sort of only talk about particular individuals in the past, but to actually think about why it's important to understand the history of sexuality for students sort of going through a K through 12 curriculum. And I'll just say that one thing that I hear a lot, I teach LGBT history at UIC every couple of years, and I can't tell you the number of students over the last 15 years who have said to me, why did I never learn this? Why am I just learning this now? And so I'm thinking that this will help with that.
And Senator Staines, was there resistance in getting this law passed in the first place?
Yes, the first year we passed in the Senate, but not the House. So it took a second year until we passed it in both places. Resistance came from, one, there's always some groups that don't like anything to be mandated in the curriculum. They don't want their hands tied. And then second, we did have some folks on sort of the religious extremes who are afraid that in some way, shape, or form this inhibits religious freedom, and would try to, that they wanted an opt-out. We did not have to do that. And my view is that we don't want to opt out of accurate history. And it really is demonstrated that LGBT youth who are in a school where they're taught positive things about their own history really do have better outcomes and are more accepted in those schools. So very happy we did not have to succumb to some of that resistance.
And Victor Salvo, what is the Legacy Project offering teachers to help them begin providing this education to students when they hopefully come back to the classroom in the fall?
We've put together several dozen lesson plans at this point that are divided into 4 tracks, depending upon sort of general age level and cognitive retention for roughly 2nd graders through 12th graders. And our content will be made available online, along with additional multimedia pieces that we're developing for each one as well. And we're doing really kind of the heavy lifting on actually analyzing each one of the individual Illinois state education codes and aligning each one of our lesson plans specifically with those codes, so that when we develop our search engine for our education materials, which will not only be our materials, but all the other materials that will be brought into it for early childhood and such, teachers will be able to go in and enter their search criteria as far as the specific school code that they're looking to fulfill, the subject matter, the grade in school, particular search terms, or be able to search by an individual name or something like that. And once they've made their search criterion, they'll be able to, see all the stuff that populates under that person. And because it's an ongoing iterative process, it'll continue to evolve. It's not like we're done after this year.
Of course. And Professor Breyer, this law sets out inclusion, but no specific mandates on what will be taught, for how long, exactly when. Do you see this as a challenge in meeting the goal of making that LGBTQ history an essential part of understanding history and avoiding, like you said, the situation where kids in college come to you and say, why didn't I know this?
Yeah, it's a real question. I was thinking a lot about the Burge reparations curriculum that was developed in Chicago for 8th and 10th grade. And I looked at the way that they've planned the lessons, and part of it is about different methods of teaching that can be integrated into the curriculum across topic area. So they use talking circles as a model for engaging students in conversation, restorative practices. And I think that we're gonna need to really think about that in terms of how we make sure that students are able to take in this information and apply it, so that it's not just about knowing a certain set of facts, but also about understanding how to approach the study of the past so that we can sort of make new models for moving forward in the future. And that's really what historians try to do in our day jobs.
And Senator Staines, we've got about 20 seconds left. I'm going to let you have the last word. What are you hoping Illinois public school students come away with learning about LGBTQ history after this begins?
the valuable contributions and just to not have them written out. I think it's so important for people who are LGBTQ to see their own histories reflected in the history books, have that accuracy. And really, as Victor said, I think it'll prevent deaths. I think there'll be a lot more acceptance of LGBTQ individuals when you actually see the contributions that they've made throughout history.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Senator Staines, Victor Salvo, and Jennifer Breyer. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And now to Paris and how area hotels are holding up amid the pandemic. Paris.
Brandis, patrons may be flocking back to Chicago's bars and restaurants during phase 4 of the state's reopen, but there's at least one major industry still waging an uphill battle: hotels. With business travel at a near standstill and conventions and events capped at 50 people for the foreseeable future, hotels of all sizes are trying to figure out how to stay afloat during this new normal. And here to tell us more are George Jordan, president of Oxford Hotels and Resorts, which operates the London House Hotel, the Godfrey, and several other properties in Chicago; Kimberly Lowry, owner of the Publishing House, bed and breakfast located in Chicago's West Loop; and Nabil Mubayad, general manager of the Kimpton Gray Hotel in downtown Chicago and director of Midwest operations for the Kimpton Hotel brand. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight. I want to go down the line for all of you, since you operate different styles of hotels. First, Mr. Mubayad, how is business right now?
Well, I mean, it's definitely still a struggle. We have gone through a couple of months of just having almost no occupancies to now slowly seeing a little bit of occupancy coming back, mainly on weekends. And but it's a slow and steady pace. Nothing like we used to have. 95% less business right now than we used to have a year ago. So it's really tough.
And Mr. Jordan, you operate some popular chic hotels downtown. How's your occupancy rate right now?
Well, I think we're faring a little bit better than most hotels, primarily because we were able to weather the storm through a series of city contracts that tied up about 1,100 rooms for us during the worst of the worst. And that allowed us to continue to market the remainder of the rooms into the general public. I think Nabil would probably agree that the one segment of the market that is coming back is the leisure drive market. And so we are seeing exactly what Nabil has said, significant uptick on the weekends. It's a very short booking window, which is the timeline of people booking anywhere from 0 to 72 hours. And our hotels this weekend, we expect, will be running somewhere between 50 and 70% occupancy, but that's primarily dealing with the July 4th recess. And to echo what Nabil was saying, I mean, we saw rates and occupancy down about 95% at the worst of it. And I think it's down citywide now about 70% as compared to last year. So still a long way to go, but green shoots, green shoots.
And Miss Lowry, how about at the bed and breakfast?
Yeah, I think we fare the same way. I mean, our weekends are definitely gotten busier. We used to have a huge corporate crowd being in the West Loop with a lot of the bigger companies like McDonald's and Google's here. But recently, we're getting a lot of staycationers, people coming to visit family, finally feeling that need to come out and reconnect with people. A lot of people from the neighboring states that don't want to fly, so they're driving. And as Chicago opens, I think we definitely are going to see more people coming in now that there's things and activities for people to do, giving them incentive to come to a larger city as opposed to like head out to their lake house.
And so it sounds like you're all having to cater to some different markets right now to stay afloat. Mr. Mubayad, for those concerned about sanitation, how are your hotels handling COVID-19 precautions?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main things that we really focus on is the Kimpton promise of our fresh and clean rooms. We're part of IHG, a big brand that has very strict guidelines on how we clean rooms, what chemicals we use. We disinfect all the high touch areas in the hotel, in the elevators and the guest rooms. We've also removed certain items that are perhaps nice to have but not necessary at this time, such as the extra pillows and the extra notepads and minibar items, and those are available at our front desk. And we also are using a lot of contactless type of technology, so texting with our guests, as well as using QR codes to tell them about what's going on in the area, as well as our rooftop bar, Baleo. The menus are on those QR codes so that our guests actually don't have to touch a menu or be in contact with anything that they don't need to be.
Ms. Lowry, at the publishing house, bed and breakfast, is it more difficult? It seems like that kind of hotel, you'd have to be a little more personal. How do you deal with COVID-19 precautions?
Look, I think we're doing a lot of things like the bigger hotel chains are doing, but we're a much smaller space with a much smaller staff. We only, at maximum, can have 22 people in house, and we only have 3 staff. So we just don't have that frequency of public spaces like a lot of other places do. So with that, I think we can maintain a lot of that cleanliness and disinfecting and just in general. I mean, we have a high standard of cleanliness in the house anyways, but we pretty much do have touchless check-in. Everyone has their own personalized codes. We can do self-check-in options as well for people, so they don't even have to come in contact with us. We do not have mini bars in the rooms, but we have a communal space that everything is grab and go, and hand sanitizer in every place, especially in the bedrooms as well. So it's, I think people feel generally really safe here.
Mr. Jordan, one thing we've heard from the hotel industry in general is worry that this 50-person gathering limit is harmful because hotels can't hold some of the events that they rely upon for revenue, weddings, conventions. Can you give us a sense of how that impacts business?
Well, I'm not sure that I would use the word harmful in as much as that I'm not an epidemiologist, and we do rely on Allison Arwady at the city and the CDC to give us guidance as to what's, the best course of action. So obviously we'll follow those dictates as best we can. But in speaking with your producer earlier today, I mentioned that I think we need a sort of a phase 4.5. Right now we're in phase 4, which allows a certain amount of indoor dining, 25% of the placard occupancy, and outdoor dining, as long as there's social distancing, et cetera. I think everybody's pretty clear on that. But then there's this gatherings of 50, which is a little bit amorphous. We're not exactly sure what a gathering constitutes. So for example, if you had a hotel, and there are many of them in the city that have a 12,000 square foot ballroom, they're limited to 50 people in that room. And quick math would say you've got well over 200 square feet per people. So I don't want to argue or play scientist here, but I think that there's got to be something between phase 4 and phase 5, because phase 5 is supposed to be a full reopening. And according to the governor, that's going to happen when there's a vaccine and or effective treatments. And I don't know if that's next week or in 10 years. So you have a lot of real estate in these hotels, ballrooms, restaurants, meeting rooms, event centers that are simply not being used because of the various constraints. And obviously that's very deleterious to our profit and loss statements. And it's certainly not helpful to those employees that would normally be working those spaces and now find themselves either out of a job or if their unemployment is going to run out soon enough. So we'd like to get those meeting spaces, ballrooms back into service. But I want to do so obviously in consort and cooperation with the medical authorities and the legislative authorities. But the quick answer is, yeah, we need to get those ballrooms back up and running.
Mr. Mubayad, in Kimpton hotels, do you think that your ballrooms and event spaces can safely have more than 50 people?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think we all have, like George said, so many different spaces with different sizes. And if we do it the right way with the correct social distancing requirements, we're not doing buffets anymore. We're doing individually, wrapped meals. As long as we follow the guidelines, and our staff will be wearing masks and gloves and be temperature checked every day, and we have sanitizing stations everywhere. I think there is room for some increased capacity that'll help all of us out. I do agree with that.
Ms. Lowry, we just have a couple seconds left, but I want to ask you overall, without big events returning to Chicago, without full sporting events, how big a hit is the entire industry going to take?
Look, we're in a unique situation just being who we are, is that, people can privately buy out our space and do events like family reunions, micro weddings, social gatherings. We allow 50 or under here as a maximum. So we'll get, I think, more of those things here, but I think, we all wish Chicago could open up. Unfortunately, we're not there yet for good reason. And I do look forward to it and who that brings to the city again.
All right. My thanks to all of you for joining us right now.
Thank you, and have a very nice 4th of July.
You as well.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And now to a story recorded before the pandemic hit that we weren't able to get to on the air until now. It's not common for artists to rely on the United States Postal Service as part of their work, but for Michael Thompson, the service is essential. Arts correspondent Angel Ito shares more about how this miniature artwork has made its way around the world.
It's a refined process by artist Michael Thompson, 30 years in the making. Artistic stamps created with ironic or funny stories, political messages, and sometimes cartoons, used to replace actual postage stamps.
Early on, there were a lot of pornographic ones because early on, I had to use things that were stamp-sized. And so those little nudie cards that, souvenir kind of cards.
What year would this be?
90, 91, 92.
Okay.
Matchbook covers were the right size. And so anything that had a graphic, I'd cut those out, or I'd soak them in paper and peel them off.
But the stories don't end on the stamp. They have to make it through the mail system.
When somebody's going someplace interesting to commemorate their trip. And people are nervous to do these things. I mean, I've had people who I give them a packet of envelopes and off they go. And one girl, she landed in Dubai and she was so nervous as she got off the plane that she threw them away in the bathroom before she went through customs.
Thompson tries as best as he can to have the stamps sent from the places his messages are geared toward. But because these aren't official stamps and they are often controversial, they've gotten him into quite a few difficult predicaments.
There was a story, I was detained in Turkey with my friend Jeff, my attorney friend. We used to go to Turkey, went like 3 times. And we'd rent a car and we'd drive around. You can hardly see it, but it says PKK. Because it's really illegal. You cannot write PKK or say PKK in Turkey. Anyway, so this was...
You put it on a stamp.
Yeah, and this was in my car. These were in the car.
This story is one of many because for Thompson, the stamps have no value if they haven't been officially canceled by the Postal Service. At the time of this interview, Thompson said he'd receive his stamps in the mail about once a month, but that has since slowed.
The most recent one was Xi Jinping, the leader of China. Evidently is told that he looks like Winnie the Pooh. And so Winnie the Pooh is now banned in China. So my last stamp was a picture of Winnie the Pooh with his hands over his eyes, and in Mandarin it says, "Uyghurs, where?"
Despite the many close calls these stamps have caused, Thompson says it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
This commemorates an island that is claimed both by Korea and Japan. And so one stamp with the island is the Korean version, and the same picture with the same island is the Japanese version.
It's interesting because sometimes you could get detained and other times the countries don't even find out.
Well, probably next time I go to Japan, I'll be detained now.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
We'd like to note that Thompson now includes a paid U.S. postage stamp inside every letter he mails, a tip he picked up after his first couple of run-ins with the law. And now we go back to Brandis Friedman and details about an attraction that is now open for visitors. Brandis.
Paris, there are 10 acres of outdoor gardens in full bloom of reopening, that is. Starting today, the grounds surrounding the Garfield Park Conservatory are open to area residents via the Neighbor Pass program. Joining us now to tell us more about that program is WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley. Hey again, Patty.
Hey, Brandis.
So first, how does the Neighbor Pass program work? Who's it for?
Well, I would consider it kind of a cross between a Wonka Golden Ticket and an airline's Priority Boarding Pass. It was mailed out by the conservatory to all neighbors who live in a half-mile radius of the conservatory, and it gives them first access to the conservatory during its reopening. So only people in possession of those neighbor passes can go July 1st through July 5th. So they're the first class visitors in this instance, and it's free for everybody.
A Wonka golden ticket and an airline priority pass. I like both of those.
Yeah.
So when or how can anyone who lives outside of that half-mile radius come and see the outdoor gardens?
Sure. It's a lot of dates. So I got my cheat sheet here with me, and members, as well as people with those neighbor passes, will be admitted on July 8th through the 12th. That's their kind of first class window. And they can start going online to reserve their allotted time at this point. So everybody, no matter whether you've got neighbor pass, you're a member or a member of the general public, everybody's going to need a timed reserved entry, which is pretty much the policy that all of the museums and zoos and everybody's putting into place. So then on July 15th, last date people are going to have to remember, that's when the doors are open to everybody. So neighbor pass, members, and general public.
And general public. July 15th. That's a date we'll all remember. All right, Patty
Yes.
Wetley. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website to find more details about the Neighbor Pass. That's at WTTW.com/news. And we're back with Spotlight Politics right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight podcast and subscribe.
Another push to get cops out of Chicago public schools. A plan to stem holiday weekend violence after a deadly June. Legislative wins for Mayor Lightfoot, and lawmakers react to a bombshell story about troops being targeted. We dig into those stories and more with our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Paris Schutz, and Heather Sharon. Hello again, everyone.
Hello.
So, Heather, let's start with you. Last week, of course, we talked about the Board of Education voting to keep police in Chicago public schools, which CTU has been protesting against. But there's a city council hearing on this tomorrow. What can we expect?
That's right. So more than 2 years after the city's inspector general, he's the city's watchdog. He's supposed to be on the lookout for malfeasance and abuse and fraud. He put out an audit 2 years ago that said basically having police officers in Chicago public schools can push kids into the criminal justice system, and that the city and the school district should take steps to reform the program. Finally, what with everything that's happened after the protests triggered by George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, they're going to take a look at that audit, which will give opponents of police and schools another chance to make their case to the city council that that $33 million contract should be terminated before schools start up again in the fall.
And so also tomorrow, we're expecting 1,200 additional cops to hit the streets to curb violence over that long 4th of July weekend. But at a press conference today, the mayor said that it's just part of a holistic approach. Here's a bit of that.
I do not and never have thought that you can solve the issue of public safety with law enforcement alone. That's been a strategy. That strategy's never worked. I think for those kids who are on the street, we need to reach them before they become the next trigger puller. But for those who do commit violence, for those who don't really value the sanctity of life, they should have no shelter anywhere.
Now, Paris, do the mayor and the police superintendent think that these additional officers will make the difference in crime and violence this weekend?
Well, they're going to put 12,000 additional officers on the street. That's what they do in traditional high crime weekends. I think they hope that it will make a difference, but as you heard Lightfoot there, no, it's not going to make a difference acutely in the short run. Violence is up this year. It's tragic, but it does also up all over the country, in cities all over the country, up at monumental levels in places like New York, LA, and the mayor has cited, COVID-19 and some of the unrest. The FOP also talked about officers perhaps standing down because their morale is really low right now, and the FOP president saying he doesn't know whether the mayor has their back. Certainly hope that's not the case when neighborhoods certainly need law enforcement and need protection, but there's so many factors this year that are compounding the traditional factors in Chicago. Let's hope for a weekend that hasn't been like the last few weekends, but the signs and the risk factors are there.
Right. We saw a huge spike in violence last month. 424 shootings and 89 murders. Now that's up significantly over June of 2019, but police stops and arrests were down. The police union president, though, as you said, Paris, he blames low morale and a lack of support from the mayor. Here's what the mayor had to say.
That's easy for the leadership of the FOP to mouth those words because we're in what they know are going to be really, really, really tough contract talks. That FOP contract, for the first time in our history, is actually going to speak the values of the residents of Chicago.
Amanda, any hope for that relationship to improve?
Ooh, again, this is something that would, of course, help the city, a city, frankly, in mourning. I mean, we should say the names. We have, what, a 10-year-old, Lena Marie Nunez, a 1-year-old, Sincere Gaston, who lost their lives. Obviously, they are children. They are innocent. Something has to change. But we've heard the rhetoric. We've been talking about it. You just heard the mayor right there. The FOP president has said that he feels as if the mayor has used some let's say, 4-letter words to talk to CPD officers. So no, this is every bit as fraught and fractured a relationship, and that certainly is not helping matters. I think both sides believe they need to talk tough in order to get what they want, but is that helping to lead to a solution at this time of violence? No, of course not. I mean, heck, we have even President Donald Trump who offered to come on in. That's very much seen. The mayor said that she saw that as a political move. And I think many suspect that that was the case. But anybody, I think, is looking for a solution that will bring an end to this as soon as absolutely possible.
And Heather, you know, the mayor and the superintendent, they say that police activity was down because everyone was home because of the pandemic. Of course, though, we saw plenty of people, lots of activity on the streets as demonstrators protested police brutality and systemic racism. What pushback has the police department received over how they responded to those protests?
Well, there were nearly 400 complaints filed against officers in connection with the protests, and 56% of those complaints related to excessive force. And of course, one of those complaints was filed by Jeanne Foreman, the president of the Chicago Police Board, who's charged with disciplining officers who commit misconduct. We don't know how that investigation is playing out. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability has said they will investigate every complaint. However, they have recommended that the police department suspend the police powers of a half dozen officers in connection with these investigations. And we will have to see more whether any are actually disciplined once these investigations are complete.
And Heather, also two of Mayor Lightfoot's major priorities after she took office became Law Today. What do we know there?
Well, we heard Amanda talk at length about the minimum wage increase that will go effect in Chicago. And also those minimum wage workers, a lot of them will be getting now 10 days notice of their schedules. And if you have a job where you're not really sure when you're going to work and when you have to clock in and when you'll be able to log out, that can create a lot of stress for your family and just, you know, for your life. So this ordinance, dubbed the Fair Work Week ordinance, is designed to give people a little bit more control over that. They can turn down extra hours or they can get paid to work within 12 hours. It goes into effect as of today, and in 2022 it will increase to 14 days, up from 10 days. And this was really a high priority of the Chicago Federation of Labor, and former Mayor Rahm Emanuel had blocked this initiative for almost 2 years before Mayor Lightfoot took office and pushed it through in her first 100 days in office.
Now, another big priority for the mayor, of course, was getting a bill passed to make Chicago casinos feasible. Governor signed that bill into law yesterday. You know, Paris, speaking of casinos, they're opening back up today. Coronavirus concerns, restrictions there?
Well, 50% capacity is what will be allowed. You'll probably see folks lining up outside casinos. Each casino has to come up with its own plan. You're probably going to have card tables, blackjack tables where you have to be seated further apart. Lots of hand sanitizers everywhere. And oh yeah, no buffets, so no shrimp cocktail.
That's the only reason.
If that's still a thing. Right?
That's the only reason for some folks to go. Amanda, though, there has been concern this week about how Illinois has handled contact tracing. Let's hear what State Representative LaShawn Ford had to say about this.
We have not heard anything from the governor's office about how they're going to roll this plan out. And unfortunately, the Black community, I think, is going to suffer from this.
Amanda, has the state been hitting its contact tracing goals?
Well, no, you actually saw moving from phase 3 to phase 4, which of course we are now in. Originally, that was going to require something like 90% of all COVID cases being traced within 24 hours. Whether the state is actually hitting that target, we don't know, because I haven't seen any numbers or data either way, but it certainly does not look like it. In fact, you hear from people that say, hey, we want to do this work, but they haven't yet been hired. The administration, however, the Pritzker administration, that is, says that it is in the midst of bringing people on for this work. And there are those who are part of it, and they say, you know what, now is the time to begin to ramp up. They say it takes training. This is people's private, personal health information, so we need to be cautious and careful with it. Again, comes months into, of course, the coronavirus pandemic, but the hope is that should there be a second wave in the fall, should cases go up, that then perhaps contact tracing will at last be in place. Ford, I should add, was going to plan to talk with the administration today, so I haven't heard how that went.
And Heather, we're almost out of time, but on the city level, how is Chicago handling contact tracing?
So Chicago says it is tracing 100% of new confirmed cases, and that means reaching out to the person and finding out where they've been and who they might have been in contact with. But they acknowledge not everybody that they've been in contact with, they've been able to say, hey, you've potentially been exposed to the coronavirus, please get a test or please stay home. People are reluctant to pick up phone calls that they don't know who's calling, and they're even more reluctant to share personal medical information. So Dr. Ellison already told reporters this week that they are working to build that trust by partnering with community organizations that already have a lot of credibility in the community.
Yeah, a lot more work for them to do to gain that trust, it sounds like. All right, that's Spotlight. That's thanks to Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz, of course. A while back, arts producer Mark Vitale introduced us to a local artist who's blowing up during the shutdown. This art teacher enlisted her kids for an inflatable art show in their yard. Here's another look.
Oh my God.
Two teenagers model their mother's latest artwork called Extreme Protection Suits.
My work is really grounded in the idea of wanting to be as democratic as possible, and so humor is a really important place for me to draw people in, think about entertainment and slapstick humor. I think in terms of all the seriousness and the trauma that's happening right now, I was really interested in using humor as a way to deal with trauma. I think a lot of the time it's laughing as a welcome relief, right? Or as a way to get through hardship. Ow.
The suits were made for a spring show at the Hyde Park Art Centre, now postponed until August. Born and raised in Scotland, Claire Ashley teaches at the School of the Art Institute. She's been making large-scale inflatables for years, and sometimes makes videos of the works with unexpected songs.
That monumentality in the work is built on the kind of desire to take up as much space as possible as a woman in the art world, right? And to really think about obnoxiousness and absurdity and over-the-top ridiculousness as part of its humor and part of its visibility. I want them to be flexible, I want them to be adaptable, I want them to have kineticism and speed, as opposed to kind of the monumental sculptors from the 60s who were making these heavy steel, solid, massive public sculptures that would kill people if they fell on them.
For fabric, she uses Tyvek, or nylon with PVC coating.
It's very low-tech in some sense. I buy small tabletop fans. I glue those into a Walmart kids backpack. The backpack gets stitched into the fabric, and then it gets plugged into the wall. And I really do love that quality of the inflatable as a living, breathing being in the world. And certainly in terms of my offspring, I certainly think of them in relationship to those sort of beings that I take care of in a different way than I do the kids. I get to control them in a way different way than I unfortunately don't get to control my children anymore.
We asked her daughters what they think about all of this.
I'm pretty tired. I was woken up for this. But it's kind of cold in here, which is nice. It's pretty weird. Feels like you're kind of in a cloud. Yeah, it's hard to move. It definitely feels like you have like a bunch of weight on you. It's definitely something to brag about to my friends. I put it on my story and they're like, what's going on?
This is a good way for a mother to protect their daughters in terms of social distancing. They can't do a thing. They're tortured.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
There's more from artist Claire Ashley on our website, including that entire music video with the country and western song. And that's our show for this Wednesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm whose pro bono work kept open a church shelter for the homeless in Chicago's southern suburbs.